Welcome to the Writing Studio online tutorial. So, what is Writing Studio? The Center for Early Reading at Amplify created Writing Studio to help build your students as writers. We will spend our time together today looking at how Writing Studio provides scaffolded and systematic instruction to build writing capacity within your students. But before we begin, let's take a moment to clarify how it works with the CKLA program. It is a companion program that your school has decided to purchase to supplement your CKLA curriculum. This means that Writing Studio will align with what you are teaching during your CKLA instruction. Writing Studio provides additional writing opportunities for teachers to use to extend writing instruction. Writing Studio does not replace the writing instruction provided in CKLA. CKLA should remain your core program as it meets or exceeds all college and career readiness writing expectations. Writing Studio builds on this core instruction by providing extra practice around each of the 3 text types. Lastly, please note that Writing Studio can be used in grades K through 5. Now, let's dig in to learn more about how to use Writing Studio. Due to the nature of today's online training, a quick housekeeping step needs to be reviewed before we can proceed. In order to fully learn about Writing Studio through this online platform, there are activities we are going to ask you to complete during our time together. When this is the case, you will see an image similar to this, which will indicate it's time to pause the video and complete the instruction on that screen. Here is how we will unpack Writing Studio during this module. Here are the objectives for this session. It is now time to pause the video and complete your very first task. When you have completed this task, please resume the video. If you are unable to complete this, please email support@amplify.com or contact your Amplify account manager. Let's begin. Open the participant activity guide you just printed and turn to page 1. As I explain the design principles listed here, please feel free to record any notes in your activity notebook. CKLA's Writing Studio is aligned to CKLA content. This means that during Writing Studio, students will draw on content knowledge they've learned during CKLA assignments. This also means that there are times when you will be using materials from CKLA during your Writing Studio lessons. More on this later. Writing Studio includes explicit instruction in the writing types, such as opinion, narrative, and informational genres. Writing opportunities within Writing Studio appear in the form of problems to be solved, such as how to change a law or recruit a new colleague. Writing Studio provides exemplar text and explicit modeling opportunities as well. Writing Studio instruction incorporates different strategies for each element of the writing process, and we'll look at those in a moment. And last but not least, Writing Studio requires students to work and write collaboratively. Let's see how you did. This is an example of one teacher's notes recorded during the last activity. Please pause the video and check your answers now. Go ahead and turn to activity page 2, if you will. And let's play a game called Writing Studio by the Numbers, everyone's favorite game. Look at the numbers on this handout. What could these possibly have to do with a writing program? Let's start with the first row, 30. I wonder what 30 has to do with Writing Studio. Well, each Writing Studio lesson lasts about 30 minutes. How about 8? There are 8 lessons per unit. How about 2? There are 2 units dedicated to each writing genre: narrative, informative, and opinion. 7? There are 7 units per grade level. But wait a minute. 7 units per grade level, and I just told you that there are 2 of each of the text types. Well, 2 times 3 is 6, not 7. Well, if you were thinking that same thing, you are correct. We really do. 2 times 3 really is 6. But there is a 7th unit where the students may select the best text type for the writing challenge they are tasked with. We will look at this much closer, but for now, just jot down that there are 7 units per grade level. Which leaves us with the number 1. Number 1, there is 1 teacher guide per grade level. So even though there's 7 units, we're only sending you 1 teacher guide because we've combined all the units into 1 teacher guide. In your program guide, you will find this document. It shows how Writing Studio aligns with the CKLA domains. The darker shaded units have Writing Studio units tied to them. As you can see, each grade level has 7 darkly shaded CKLA domains, which matches what we already know about Writing Studio. There are 7 units per grade level. Let's look at first grade. That's the orange column. I can quickly see what content my Writing Studio lessons will be tied to. For example, Writing Studio 1 is going to be tied to the content of the human body, which is domain 2 in CKLA. Writing Studio 2 is going to be tied to domain 3, different lands, similar stories, and so on, all the way down through the alignment chart. Another handy chart found in your program guide is this unit structure document. This shows at a glance what writing types will be the focus of each of your Writing Studio units. We will look at this more closely in a moment. Another thing to note about Writing Studio is how it flows naturally from one grade to the next. Writing Studio truly builds coherently from one grade level to the next. Here's an example from grade 2 and grade 5. These are graphic organizers from the program. As you can see, there is a consistency for students as they move from grade to grade and from teacher to teacher, but the rigor increases. Now that you've seen Writing Studio from a broad perspective, let's look at these ideas we just reviewed more closely. We will begin with looking at the materials that come with the program, or as we like to call them, Writing Studio core components. With each new program comes a few new resources for teaching. When you purchase Writing Studio, you will receive the following teacher materials: 1 teacher guide, which houses all 7 units, and 1 program guide, which contains resources you will need for your lessons throughout the year. What you see here is a kindergarten teacher guide and a first grade program guide. I know this because these are color-coded the same way that your CKLA materials are. Kindergarten teachers, your materials will always be red. First grade, yours are always orange, or mango, or peach. Not quite sure what color that is. But what is important to note is that these books will look identical except for the titles down below. So just take note of that when they arrive. It is pause and learn time again. Please pause the video here and complete the instructions. Now that you have located your print materials, let me also show you where the materials can be found online. To access a digital version of your teacher materials, you will need to log into our hybrid platform called Inkling. I'll walk you through this now, and in a moment you will have time to pause the video and follow the written directions to complete this on your own. The first step is to navigate to ckla.amplify.com and select the hybrid login. That's over here. You will now see the login page. Here you will need to enter in your personal username and password. If you did not receive these, please reach out to your local IT administrator and ask them to set up your account. Once you've entered your personal login information, you will land on the Amplify Library page. This contains all of your teacher guide and program guides for Writing Studio. Now, if you remember, we have discussed that your printed teacher guide is one book with all 7 units inside of it. Note that when you're on the online platform, each one of your units is broken up individually. So for now, let's go ahead and click on Writing Studio Unit 1 for your grade. Once you've entered the unit, this is the landing page you will fall on. I have a black bar open on the left side. That's the navigational bar. If you don't see this, there will be 3 lines right behind it that you can click on, which will open this. Once you find this page, go ahead and click on Lesson 1. Now it's time to pause the video and to complete these steps on your own. In your participant activity guide, you will find a T-chart on page 5. Can you find that chart now? One side of this T-chart is labeled Program Guide, the other one is Teacher Guide. I'm going to review each of these components, and as I do, feel free to write any key points down in these boxes. Let's begin with the Program Guide. I am going to play a short video for you that will walk you through the Program Guide. As I do, feel free to record any notes within your participant activity guide. Let's look at the program guide that comes with Writing Studio. I have my first grade program guide open to the table of contents. The program guide begins with an overview of the program at large. It talks about things regarding assessments, our design principles, basically the how and the why and the design behind Writing Studio. But what I want to point out to you are the 2 things located near the back of the program guide. The first is the pacing section. Within the pacing section of the program guide, you will see charts regarding how to pair Writing Studio with CKLA. We're going to look at those much deeper, but I want you to be aware that the pacing charts are all located in your program guide. The next thing I want to point out is teacher resources. In my first grade program guide that I'm looking at here, it tells me that teacher resources begin on page 39. Let's head there now. There's a couple of features regarding this teacher resource section that I want to point out. The first is all of the teacher resources for all 7 of your units are housed in this one program guide. So right here you can see it says Writing Studio 1, which tells me these are the teacher resources for Writing Studio Unit 1. Let's look at a few of those resources. One of the first things you're going to come across is the assessment writing prompt and the rubric that goes with it. Once again, this is just for Unit 1 because I'm in that portion of the program guide. The other things that are going to be in here are projectable files. Oftentimes within Writing Studio, your teacher guide will prompt you to project a poster or to create cards. In this case, the example is right here. Those things, when it's talking about projecting or any teacher resources, are all found here in your program guide. The other thing that I want to point out that's found in your program guide is the actual student activity pages. These are blackline masters that you will need to go in and make copies of as you use Writing Studio. Again, these are chunked together by units within your program guide. So let's review. The program guide is clearly an important resource in your instruction and within your classroom. It begins with an overview of the program, both the structure and the pedagogy. Then it ends with discussion about what assessments are included, followed by pacing documents to help you align Writing Studio with CKLA. Lastly, the most important section is your teacher resources. This is where you're going to go almost daily to grab teaching tools, such as Blackline Masters of your student materials, rubrics, and posters. So now that you've heard a little bit about the program guide, go ahead and open your activity page up and add your key points that you discovered during this tutorial. It's on page 5 of your activity book. Now let's dig in to the teacher guide. I'm going to do a teacher guide walkthrough for you. You're welcome to follow along in your paper teacher guide as I go through. Please also remember to add any notes onto page 5 of your activity book. The teacher guide, as we've stated before, contains all 7 units in one book. So the first page is just going to tell you what page number each unit starts on. Once you get to a unit, you're going to see another table of contents. This time it's going to call out the lesson by lesson and give you a high-level overview of what's happening in each lesson within that unit. Now turn to Lesson 1 in your teacher guide. Lesson 1 begins very similar to how CKLA Lesson 1 begins. It starts with the title of the lesson, and then it has these very important boxes, the primary focus and the formative assessment. The primary focus is going to tell you what is the key learning objective for that day. And it also tells you what standard that key learning objective is tied to. Some teachers call these SWOBITs, learning targets, learning goals, whatever you call it, it's right here for you so you no longer have to come up with what is the focus of your lesson. Then in addition to that, we've included a formative assessment to help you determine, well, did we meet the primary focus? Did I meet today's learning target? So in this case, the focus of the lesson was students write narratives about a hero. How am I going to determine that? I'm going to use activity page 1.1, which is entitled A Hero's Tale, and students write narratives about a hero. So you're going to use this student activity page to monitor the success of this focus of the lesson. Now, on that same page or the next page, depending on what grade level you're in, you're going to see a lesson at a glance. This is just that, a very simple screenshot of what you're going to be teaching throughout the Writing Studio lesson. But what's particularly great about this chart is that it also includes grouping. So you can see the diversity and grouping within the program. It also points out materials and pacing. Another thing that is found at the start of every lesson, this is usually located right below the lesson at a glance chart, is the advanced preparation. As elementary school teachers, we all know that there are things we have to prepare from day to day. The great thing about Writing Studio and CKLA is we just put these in bullet form right at the start of every lesson, so you can very quickly be ready for the day's lesson. We also include universal access. These are additional optional things you can do to help make sure that every student has the same universal access regarding their learning ability. Something new to the second edition of CKLA and to Writing Studio are these sidebar supports. These will include things such as support and challenge. It'll also be where you're going to find all of your EL learner supports. These are found in the sidebar throughout the lessons, and what is contained within them varies lesson by lesson. You also note here that we've given you a little icon to let you know this is the formative assessment tied to that day's focus of the lesson. So take a minute, turn to page 5, pause the video. Did you record these key items? Now it's time for everyone's favorite part of the day, assessments. In Writing Studio, there are 3 types of assessment: pre-assessment, formative, and summative. These are covered in great detail in the program guide you received, but let's look at each one of them briefly now. Please pause the video while you complete the following task. Let's review what you've learned. So the pre-assessment is located during the first lesson of each unit. I know this because I navigated to the table of contents page, and within lesson 1 I see right here, narrative pre-assessment on page 5. When I got to that first lesson, I always want to begin my planning with looking at the lesson at a glance and the advanced prep section. So I see here the narrative pre-assessment is going to be done independently, will take 15 minutes, and requires activity page 1.1. Reading the items down here, I realize I have to prepare the writing prompt for display. This writing prompt is found in your program guide within the teacher resources for Unit 1. You can project this, or you could make a copy of it for the students. It also tells me that I need to prepare copies of activity page 1.1 so that each student has their own copy. Lastly, it tells me to prepare the rubric so I can be grading the assessment when they're finished. Additionally, there's always universal access options tied to this lesson. Let's look at the pre-assessment now. I know the pre-assessment takes 15 minutes. It's stated here. These are the steps I will need to do as a teacher. First, distribute activity page 1.1 to the students. Then give the students pretty simple instructions. I would like you to write a story in response to this prompt. Remember, you should write as complete a story as possible in the time I've given. Ready? Begin. So as you can see, you never read the directions explicitly, directly, literally. You summarize them and paraphrase them to fit your own style. But the general idea is here. What might have grabbed your attention was this note. Since this is a pre-assessment, we want to shy away from giving the students extra instruction or encouraging the students to write for the whole time or giving them background information they may need or prompting them with other writing skills. This is very hard for us as teachers. Once a teacher, always a teacher. It's hard to take that hat off. But for this to be a true pre-assessment, we need to see what the students can do with very little prompting. Lastly, down here, it gives me instructions letting me know that I need to collect their essays and I need to use the narrative writing rubric to evaluate their work. It also lets me know that I will be using the same rubric at the end of this unit. These rubrics are found in your program guide. The rubrics are located within the teacher resources of each unit. Here's an example of a first grade writing rubric. This is for narrative writing. Please pause the video while you complete the following. As discussed earlier, every lesson starts with a primary focus. This primary focus helps us stay on track and keep our instruction targeted to the standard that the focus is aligned to. We've also talked about the formative assessment provided to monitor this primary focus. But additionally, there's also instructional tools found within the lesson. For instance, you see here an example of a check for understanding. It says, ask students to name and describe the parts of a narrative. Let's go back and read this primary focus. Students use a story map and collaborate to plan a narrative about the best school lunch. As you can see, both the formative assessment and this check for understanding directly align with the focus of the lesson. We want all of our supports to stay on track to the standard that we are focusing on for that day. Now please pause the video while you complete these activities. Again, we provide rubrics for each of the genre types and for each grade, and these are located within your program guide. Please pause the video while you read the following about our rubric and scoring process. Now it's time for an activity. On pages 6 through 11 in your participant activity guide, we've provided a ton of rubric samples for your grade. You'll need to locate the page that associates with the grade you teach, and you're going to annotate that rubric. This essentially just gives you a moment to really dig into those rubrics and understand what you're going to be tasked to assess students on. Pause the video and complete that activity now. So we've now covered an overview of Writing Studio. We've talked about the core components or materials that come with the program, and we've dug deeper into assessments. That leaves one more piece of the puzzle before we dig into Writing Studio's content, and that's pacing and planning. As mentioned earlier, Writing Studio directly correlates with your CKLA instruction and the domain content being covered in your grade. Let's look a little closer at how that works. Please turn to page 12 in your participant activity guide. On page 12, you will see a chart just like this. Page 13 is a continuation of this chart. I'm going to walk you through the best way to complete this chart. Once you've finished, you will have a better understanding of 1, how Writing Studio ties to CKLA instruction, and 2, how writing instruction progresses through Writing Studio across the year. So looking at column 1, it says, the CKLA domain that this Writing Studio unit connects to is, and you would want to use the Writing Studio alignment chart. This is located 1 in your program guide, but we've also given a copy of it for you in your participant activity guide as well. So you can flip back and look at that page during this activity. The way that you would do this is you're going to be looking at the bolded domains for your grade. So if I'm looking at first grade, the very first bolded domain I come across is the human body. That tells me that Unit 1, Writing Studio, is going to be tied to Domain 2, the human body, because the first Writing Studio or bolded unit is the human body. What I would write here in Unit 2 would be Different Lands, Similar Stories, because I see that that is the second bolded unit. I'm going to carry on all the way down to this column using this going bolded block by bolded block. I would skip astronomy and the history of the earth because since these are not bolded, there is no Writing Studio tied to them. The next column is a little trickier. It says, the CKLA lesson I need to teach before I begin this Writing Studio unit is, and the correct answer for Unit 1 is Lesson 5. But let me talk to you about how I got there. There are pacing guides located within your program guide. So you will have one pacing guide chart for each Writing Studio unit. We've included 2 of these in your participant activity guide to help you complete this activity, but you do have all of them located in the program guide. So the very first lesson, Writing Studio Lesson 1, ties directly to Lesson 5 of the human body. What this means is I should not start Writing Studio Unit 1 until I have taught Lesson 5 of the human body. So I can start this Writing Studio unit on or before the day I teach Domain 2, Lesson 5 in CKLA. So what you would write here is Lesson 5. In order to find the answer for the next box, you'd have to go to the next pacing chart because remember, this is just Unit 1. The next box asks, the text type this unit of Writing Studio addresses is, and that one's a little simpler to find. You're going to go to the Writing Studio structure document, again, housed in your program guide, but we've also provided a copy for you in your participant activity guide. And all I did here is I looked Unit 1 for Grade 1 says Introducing Narrative Writing. So I added narrative writing to this box. Unit 2, I just go down, Developing Narrative Writing. Unit 3, Next one, I'd go down and it'd be opinion. And then I would flip to the next page of my activity guide and continue moving down this chart. The last column says, the assessment prompt for this unit is. This prompt is only located in your teacher resources section of your program guide. So to complete this chart, you're going to need to open up your program guide, find the teacher resources associated with each unit, and copy down the writing prompt located there. It's usually the first page of the teacher resource section. So go ahead, pause the video, and take as much time as you need to complete this year-long planning document. It would be great if you completed the whole thing, but if you're limited on time, please do this at least for 2 units. Now for the time you've been waiting for, Writing Studio in action. Now that we've looked at the design and organization of Writing Studio, let's look deeper into a lesson to see how it works in action. First, it is important to note that each lesson follows a pattern. Well, except the first and last lessons of each unit, which include a pre and post assessment. In a nutshell, you are going to move through 4 learning blocks in each Writing Studio. Connecting a lesson. Here is where we provide time for you and your students to reflect on the CKLA content they've already learned during core instruction. Modeling. This is where you are modeling what you want your students to do. It often includes you working together with your students to complete an exemplar. Think of this as the I do or we do portion of your day. Next, it's time for students to practice the skills you just modeled, kind of like the you do portion of the day. Lessons end with a wrap-up, which may include reflection, revision, or foreshadowing for future lessons. Now let's dig into each of these inside an actual Writing Studio lesson. In the Connections section, students complete activities that prepare them for the lesson's main activity. Depending on the lesson objective, students may use the Connections activity to review content, knowledge, or reflect on the writing they did in the lesson before and prepare to move on to the next step of the writing process. Let's find a connecting example in our teacher guides. Here are 2 connecting examples. One is from 1st grade, the other is from 5th grade. Both of these are from Unit 1, Lesson 2. If you have a teacher guide in front of you, you may open it to Unit 1, Lesson 2 for your grade and review the Connections lesson, or you may use the screenshots on this page. Please pause the video now. In the modeling section, teachers demonstrate one aspect of the writing process using exemplar text. For example, teachers may demonstrate how to start drafting a narrative using a story map. This section is identified by the word modeling before a description of what you will actually be modeling. Remember earlier when we referred to this as the I do and we do sections? Let's dig into 5 examples of this modeling block. Let's look at the modeling block and how it progresses through a unit. I'll use Grade 5, Unit 3 to demonstrate. In Grade 5, Unit 3, the first exemplar shows up in Lesson 2. During this lesson, students are introduced to a character named Mia. Lesson 3, teachers model, planning a new narrative about Mia using a blank story map as a graphic organizer. Lesson 4, teachers use the story map to model how to draft a narrative from notes on a graphic organizer, and an exemplar narrative is included in the lesson. In Lessons 7 and 8, teachers model how to revise the exemplar narrative based on feedback. In each case, the exercise modeled aligns to the work students practice later in the lesson. I'd like to demonstrate some of these lessons for you now. Over the course of the next few minutes, I will demonstrate how to teach the modeling portion of each day throughout this unit. To be clear, I'm not demonstrating the whole lesson, but rather the small portion of the day called modeling. I'd also like to clarify that due to the nature of this online tutorial, I will be completing much of the lesson using pre-populated forms so you can see what a lesson looks like. However, in your classroom, you would actually be writing on the board or typing on a computer. Another thing I'd like to point out before I dive in is that I will include the teacher guide excerpts so that you can follow along with me. You may want to pause the video as each new lesson is started so that you can first read the lesson as written in order to compare it to what you hear and see me do. Let's begin. I'm going to start with lesson 2. Okay, students, are you ready to go to the beach? This week you will learn about narratives by reading and writing your own. I'd like to begin by taking you to the beach to meet my friend Mia. Mia has lots of adventures while visiting her Aunt Penelope. I'd like to read to you about one of those adventures now. As you listen to the first narrative, pay close attention and identify the characters, the events that happen in the story, and setting, and good descriptive words. One summer, Mia went to visit her Aunt Penelope, who lived very far away from Mia, but very close to the ocean. Penelope, who was Mia's favorite aunt, promised to take Mia to see the ocean during her visit, since she had never seen it before. When they got near the beach, Mia noticed that the air smelled kind of salty. Penelope explained that the smell comes from algae and helps animals like birds find the water. As Penelope spoke, they reached the top of the hill, and suddenly Mia could see the ocean. She had always thought it would be one color, but from the hill, she could see that it was really a lot of different shades of blue and green, kind of like the patchwork quilt on her bed at Penelope's house. "It's so much prettier than I suspected," Mia said. "Wait until you play in it," Penelope answered. "You'll really love it then." A little while later, when Mia went to the ocean for the first time, she wasn't sure what Penelope was thinking. Mia walked into the water until it came up to her knees. She planned to swim just as she had learned at her local pool, but before she could start, a big wave rolled in and knocked her down. As Mia fell, the water burned her eyes, and she worried about what kind of animals might be in the water with her. When she finally stood up, she looked back at the shore. Penelope was farther away than she had been. Mia had ended up a little bit down the beach. Mia walked out of the water and back to Penelope. "I think I like the pool better," she said. So that was lesson 2. Let's look at lesson 3. This could happen the very next day or a few days later. Remember yesterday when we went to the beach with Mia? I want to write a story about another one of Mia's adventures with her Aunt Penelope. Before I do, let's reflect on some other stories we have heard during our CKLA time. Can any of you name a few adventures Don Quixote had in the stories we've been reading? Oh, those are great examples. Now I wonder, were all of Don Quixote's adventures fun? Well, you're right. Not all of them were fun. Some were a little scary. Well, I like to write a story about Mia, but this time I'd like to write about an adventure that may not have been fun for her. Who knows what the first step is in writing a story? Yes, planning. Today I'm going to plan my story about Mia by using a story map. I know I want to write a narrative about Mia having an adventure that isn't all fun. I think I'll write about something that sounds fun, but might be more work than expected. One thing like that is getting a dog. Maybe I'll write about Penelope's dog. He might be a bit of a troublemaker. I think I'll name him Otis. The first element on the map is the title. I think I might call my narrative Mia Meets Otis, because I want to use the title to make my readers interested in the story. They won't know who Otis is, so maybe they will want to read ahead to learn about that. So I'm going to write Mia meets Otis on my graphic organizer story map. I know I can change my mind later, but for now, I'll just write this on the map. This lesson does continue. So that was lesson 3. Let's see what happens in lesson 4 during the modeling portion of a writing studio lesson. Now that I've planned my narrative, it's time to start writing. First, a narrative needs a title. I know from my map that I want to call my story Mia Meets Otis. So I'm going to write that on the top of my page now. Next, a narrative needs an introduction that sets up the situation in the plot, or what will happen in the story. I want to explain how Mia meets Otis first, because that's important. I think I'll write this. That's the main beginning, but maybe I should add more detail about what happened when they... This lesson does continue. Now let's move on to lesson 7. In today's lesson, you will revise your narratives to make sure they include words that do 2 important things. 1, show the order or sequence of the events you've been writing about. And 2, we want to make sure we add details to describe the events specifically. As I read the paragraph, identify the words or phrases that show the sequence of events as I read. By bedtime, Otis and Mia were getting along really well, and Mia was pleased when Otis curled up on the floor by her bed. As she turned out the lights, she told him good night, sure that they would both sleep well. However, a few hours later, Mia awoke to a terrible noise. Otis was barking, even though it was the middle of the night. She did her best to quiet him, but she felt a little grumpy he had woken her up. Who can share the words or phrases they heard that were sequence words? Yes, by bedtime and a few hours later are both sequence phrases. Now, let's look at another paragraph. Otis, no! Screamed Penelope. The dog dropped back to the floor, licking peanut butter off of his nose. In pairs, I'd like you to discuss a revision to this paragraph. Your suggestion should add a word or phrase to help show the sequence of events or pacing. This lesson continues. Now let's look at Lesson 8. For the sake of time, I won't demonstrate Lesson 8's modeling block, but rather give you a moment to look it over. Please pause the video and restart it once you're done reviewing a typical writing studio revision lesson. Now that you've seen an example of a modeling lesson across a whole unit, let's look at what would follow that lesson. The next block within each lesson is practice. The first thing to take note of is the fact that we don't label this section practice as we did in the other lesson blocks. These blocks are typically titled for the activity being practiced. In this example, it says drafting narratives. During the practice section of each lesson, students apply and practice what they've observed during the modeling section. Think of this as the you do portion of the lesson. Let's reflect back on the lessons I just demonstrated. During lesson 7, I modeled how to add more details or sequencing words to my draft. During that day's practice section, students would do the same activity, but this time independently and in their own work. The last part of the lesson is wrap-up. The wrap-up section allows students to review the work they have completed, ask them to conduct metacognitive activities reflecting on that work, or provides information needed for the next lesson. Well, now that I've walked through a lesson and a whole unit of modeling, let's dig into your grade levels, Unit 1. In your program guide, we give you guidelines for facilitation. Let's look at the 5 steps together as you prepare to teach your first Writing Studio lesson. Please open your activity guide to page 17. On this page, you will find a chart with 5 rows. I will review each of these rows at a high level, and then I will give you time to complete the chart for Writing Studio Unit 1. The first row, Review Unit. It is best practice to review each unit prior to beginning instruction. In some cases, you will want to decide in advance how to approach specific lessons. For example, culminating lessons may outline possibilities for publishing student work, but teachers are encouraged to adapt these as desired to take advantage of their specific classroom situation. As part of the Writing Studio fulfillment of each college and career readiness writing standard, the Writing Studio program provides suggestions for incorporating technology in writing instruction. However, because each school and classroom has different technologies available to it, Writing Studio lessons also include suggestions for adapting digital instruction so that students may work on paper or on a device. If your students have access to individual devices, they may compose work on a word processor rather than drafting it on paper. Although all Writing Studio units align to CKLA core content domains, some specific lessons directly incorporate materials from primary CKLA instruction. These materials could include CKLA flipbooks, image cards, and these will always be highlighted in the advanced preparation section. The advanced preparation section in each lesson alerts teachers to any materials they need to prepare prior to instruction. Universal access suggestions identify strategies teachers may use to help all students access instructional content. Exemplar texts are provided for modeling activities, but teachers may wish to customize these. Please note that these exemplars often develop across lessons, so if you replace an exemplar in one lesson, you may need to update the other exemplars through the unit. Let's think back to Mia and the beach. I could have chosen to rewrite that example to more closely relate to my students. Perhaps I provide my own story about Mia, but Mia and the mountains, if I live near the mountains. If I do this, I will also need to update the graphic organizers in the future lessons to be true to the story. Teachers will often draft or display an exemplar in one lesson, then continue to display it in subsequent lessons. So it is advisable not to get rid of these documents without previewing the entire unit. Now it is time to pause the video and to complete the following. Please turn to page 17 in your activity guide and pause the video as you complete it for Unit 1. Phew, that was a lot of learning. And if you're like me, you're not going to remember everything you just learned. But have no fear, we have tons of educational support for you. This is located in your activity guide, but you may always email for tech support at help@Amplify, pedagogical support at support@Amplify, and there's even a toll-free number. I'd like to leave you with this final quote. It's one of my favorites about writing from the Core Knowledge Foundation.